Hi, can you hear me good? Okay, so let's start. My name is Evgeny Borisov. I'm coming from Israel. I'm Java developer since 2001, and today I'm working in a company, Naya Technologies. We actually providing outsource services. We have a lot of projects we're managing with big data, and a lot of projects related to the microservice architecture, Spring Boot, and so on. I love this slide also. Yep. So let's start. This is a guy who helped me to prepare this talk, and in the Moscow we make this talk together. I hope I will survive without him. A little bit retrospective, because we are going to talk about Spring Boot. We need to remember what are the main internal components of the Spring himself. So you can see here, first of all, we have the beans, which the object which managed by Spring. We have the bean factory, which create the objects. We have, for example, XML bean definition reader or another readers which know to scan our configuration and build bean definitions from the configurations. We have bean post processors which are responsible for configuration our beans. If you want to provide some additional proxy logic or some injection according to our custom stuff, we can implement bean post processor interface and add it to the context as a bean, and it will be resolved automatically. It will be included in the list of the bean post processors. And every bean in the moment of the creation will pass through any bean post processor, including our bean post processor, so we can customize our beans. We have class pass bean definition scanner, which is responsible for scanning the packages in order to find classes marked by add component, add configuration, service, and so on. So all these components live together inside the context. Okay. So first thing we need to do in our main, for example, is to create the context. We are not managing the objects in our code. We're managing the context. Okay. And this is Spring Boot. You see the difference? This is the world of the Spring, and this is the world of the Spring Boot. So it's much more to talk about it. Because of this, we have 2 hours. And I will not cover every components you can see here, but the most important ones. Okay, so I love to write a lot of code. So we need to start with some Spring Boot application. And I decided usually any presentation, it's some bank application because it's most popular. By the way, who is working in the banks? What is the people who work in the banks? Okay, so I decided to took the Iron Bank of Game of Thrones. And let's start with some demo. We'll create some project from scratch. And the idea of the project, we need to have a service which will be able to predict will the person will possible to return the loan he will take. So to give him a loan or not to give him the loan. Okay, I don't have an internet. I have, yes, great. So it will be called Game of Thrones, the artifact ID. Iron Bank, it's our main application. Iron Bank. IROB, okay. Iron Bank. Iron Bank, Java 8. Okay, I'm sorry, I will be in Java 8. Who is using Java 11 or 12 in production? And who's using Java 8? Okay, so I'll continue with Java 8 for now. Okay. Okay, I need a Lombok. Does anybody here don't familiar with Lombok? Okay, not too many people. I will try to explain when I will start using it about it a couple of words. I need web starter. If I will need more, I will add them later to my poem. Okay, Iron Bank. No, Iron Bank. Riga. The name of the directory. Enable auto import. Okay, and let's start with some controller. Should I switch to presentation mode? Let's see. Is it better? Is it big enough, the font? Okay, great. So we'll have some iron bank controller. It will be a REST controller. And we will inject, what do you prefer, the field injection or constructor injection? Who is constructor injection and field injection? Okay, constructor injection. We will ask from IntelliJ to generate it. It's okay, IntelliJ also prefer the constructor injection. So we need to inject here some prediction service. Prediction service. Let's create this interface. And it will have only one method, which will return a Boolean. Will the person survive the winter or not? Will survive. So here will be the name of the person. And I will write some simple implementation of this. So let's call it regular. Regular prediction service, working very simple. If the name of the person contains Stark, he will not survive the winter. Okay? So if it's not contains Stark, we will return true. And according to this answer, our controller can accept the loan or not accept the loan. Okay? So it will be the service. Let's go back to the controller. Let's ask from IntelliJ to make a constructor. Okay. Now, regarding the Lombok, the people who don't familiar with it, Lombok is a notation processor which knows to generate code in the compile phase. So in case we have a lot of boilerplate, like getters, sensors, and other things that the developers of other languages like Scala, Groovy, and Kotlin laughing about Java and saying, you have getters and setters, so your class is too many lines of code. Does anybody pay for the lines like it was before? And we want to ask from Lombok, we can ask from Lombok to generate this code. So I can say all argument constructor, and I can remove this constructor. And this constructor will be generated because of this annotation. The problem of that we cannot see that we have injection here. So in case we see physically the constructor, we can click here and we can see what service will be injected, or if in case it is a problem, we can see that there is a problem. But in case we use in Lombok, we will not see this. Okay, so it's a trade-off. Let's do this. Now, here we'll have some get mapping, let's say /loan. Okay, public. The answer will be just a string if loan is accepted or loan is not accepted. Let's call it check for loan. We should receive request parameter. Request parameter, which will be the name of the person. It will be string, name I said. And we will do something like if prediction service say that this person will survive, we will say that loan is accepted. Otherwise, we will return loan was rejected. You will not survive the winter. We always need to give a reason why we will not accept the loan. Okay, let's check if it will work, and let's start to understand how all this magic is working. Did I forgot something? You can correct me. It's okay. I'm very. Just a moment. So by default, our Tomcat was started up at the port 8018. So /loan, name John Stark. So loan was rejected. He will not survive the winter. But if John was no, you see, loan is accepted. Okay, let's continue. So it was just a demo, just to show you how it's simple to start some project with web, and if I want, I easily can add some kind of embedded database or some other database. It's very simple, just by clicking several clicks on the mouse and writing several lines of the code, we receive the full application. So let's talk about the idea of the Spring Boot. Why do we need it? If we'll think like a developer, what we love to do and what we don't love to do, I hope that we love to write the code, right? Does anybody love to write the code? Our code, not to fix legacy, not to fix the bugs, just to write the new code. Okay, what we don't want to do, we don't love all the issue of the dependencies, right? We need to think about what kind of dependencies do we need. We need to solve the conflicts of the dependencies. It's not nice. Another thing the developers do not like, it's the configuration stuff. When I'm writing my own service and I'm just marking it by @service annotation or @REST controller annotation or @repository component, it's very simple and this is exactly what I want to develop. But when I need to think about some infrastructure beans like I need transaction manager, I need entity factory manager, I need dispatcher servlet configuration, so I need to configure a lot of things in order that my code will start working, I don't love this. And the last thing, it's a deployment, because when I'm running my code from IntelliJ, everything is fine. But when I'm trying to deploy it to some WebLogic or Tomcat or something else, I usually have problems, and it's complicated to debug it and to understand what the difference between my local environment and the test environment, the staging environment, and the production environment. Okay, so the idea of Spring Boot is to solve all these issues instead of you. Okay, and let's start with the dependencies. Regarding the dependencies, when you, by the way, who is using Maven here? Maven? Oh, a lot of people. And who is using Gradle? Gradle, a little bit less. Okay, so I decided correctly. I'm starting with Maven, but it's not so important because in the Gradle it's the same. So when we have the project, which is Spring Boot project, we have a parent, which is Spring Boot starter parent. And if you look inside this parent, we can see that it also has another parent, which is Spring Boot dependencies. And inside the Spring Boot dependencies, we have a huge block. Today, I think it's even bigger. It's more than 3,000 lines of the dependencies. But this block is dependency management. It isn't block of dependencies. Who is familiar with dependency management of Maven? Not dependencies, dependency management. Not many people, so I'll explain. In case we want to solve the problem of the versioning, how Maven actually is working. If you have the block of dependencies and you do not provide the version, Maven will not immediately fail. Maven will try to find the same dependency in the dependency management block to look what is the version is written there. So it means if I'm writing the version by myself, Maven will ignore the version from dependency management. Okay, but if I do not write the version by myself, Maven will go to the block of dependency management and will take it from there. But dependency management block is not block of your dependencies. So if you have this huge block, it doesn't mean that all these dependencies will be in your project, only when you will mention them. If we look in our POM we received from, I generated it right from Star Spring IO. We can see here that there is no versions of the dependencies. Even the Lombok I requested, there is no version, okay? But still it will come, okay? So this is the first thing. So we're receiving this huge block of dependency management, and we usually don't have, at least we have less problems regarding to the conflict of versions. But somebody will say, it's not a good idea because in the big companies, we don't love to have some parent which is not our parent. We want to extend from our parent, and we have the solution for this also. We can do another option to get this huge block of dependency management which was prepared by Spring IO. We can make an import. You see, in your block of dependency management, you can request for the platform BOM. Do you familiar with the BOM? What is BOM? Nobody? Almost nobody. So I explained about regarding the BOM. BOM, several years ago, I thought that BOM is something new, but it's not. It started to be popular several years ago. The BOM is a regular POM with huge block of dependency management, and that is all. Okay, BOM, it's not something special. It's just a bill of materials. It's convention. It's not something that Maven familiar with. But in your block of dependency management, you can make an import to BOM of some company, and the big companies like Spring, like Amazon, they used to create such bombs in order to solve all the conflicts of the versions. Because if you want to switch to newer versions, you usually receive a conflict because the last version of SQS of Amazon is not working with some other stuff of Amazon, and you not really know which versions will work correctly together. Who knows this? The company who developed these products. And the same with the Spring. Spring has a lot of products with a lot of different type of versions and a lot of other stuff which used by Spring, and they know which versions do not make a conflict. Because of this, they prepare every time the bomb with newer version, and only thing you need to do is just to import this bomb or extend from their parent to receive this block of dependency management. Okay, the same for the Gradle. Okay, you see, it's now. In our, as I already told, in our POM and in our build Gradle, we will not provide the versions at all because it will come from the parent or from the BOM. The next issue is the configuration of our objects. Let's talk about the Spring context configuration. First of all, where is the context here? If you remember the regular Spring code, not the Spring Boot, what always we did, we always created the Spring context, and we have a lot of options, we have a lot of classes which are Spring context classes, and where it is here. But if you look, you will find that a run method of Spring application actually builds a context. It just makes it simple for you. You don't need to decide what the class of the context you should use because it was a lot of contexts. I'll show you later the long list. And everybody familiar with this line, right? Spring application.run and our application, which is the main configuration. But if you'll try to understand what actually can be there instead of name of the class, what do you think? So the first answer is we should always provide the name of the class where this main is existing. Second option, we can just provide any class, even string class. Maybe it will even work. The third option, we can provide the XML as a string, or class pass resource, or a package object which will explain which packages Spring Boot should scan in order to build the context from this. So what is the correct answer? Who thinks that only the first is correct? Who thinks that every answer is correct? And you are right, okay? Because the run method takes the varargs, and Spring Boot knows to work with any kind of configuration, and you can even mix them because it's varargs. It can be several. It can be an array. Okay, so all answers are correct. Okay, you can see it from documentation that what kind of configurations you can provide to the run method. Usually we use Java configuration, but I'm familiar with several companies in Israel which still work with XML. They have the project from the scratch, and they working with Spring Boot, but still their main configuration file is XML. They have their reasons to do that, and it is supported. So this guy will be the Spring application today. Every time you will see his picture, this is a Spring application, just to try to visualize it. So when we're talking about the context, as I told you, it's a long list of different classes which can be Spring context. You have annotation config application context, and you have a generic Groovy application context, and many, many more. But in case we're working in Spring Boot, we don't have all this list. We don't need this. Actually, it will be only two different context types. It will be web context, which includes embedded Tomcat, and just generic application context, and that is all. How Spring Boot will decide which context to create, I'm talking about the invocation of run method, because run method is creating context for you. So how he will decide what context you should create, it's according to the class path. In case in your class path there is a servlet class, and in case you have annotation config, in case you have configurable web application context, you will receive the annotation config embedded web application context with embedded Tomcat. In case you don't have these classes, you will receive the regular context standalone. Now, when we create the context with the new, I'm talking about the old way, how many bins will be inside? Only the bins which were declared by us, or maybe several bin post processor which comes with the context. So it will not be many bins. And when we create in the context with Spring Boot, you see, I don't have many bins which is mine. You can see here Iron Bank controller, transfer money. I have several bins which is mine, but totally I have 436 beans, where they came from. Okay, it means that Spring Boot not just built in simple context with our configuration and with beans which were declared by us, but somehow it's a lot of infrastructure beans which comes from the configuration of the starters. Okay, so now we need to understand, this is one of the very important things, how can we do the same? We still not understand how it's working, but we will try to do the same. In order to do that, we'll start to write some starter, and then we will see how it happens that when we run in the Spring application.run method, and then we're receiving some beans, which is not declared inside my project, but declared in some starters. Okay, so let's try to do the same. So our task is, this is a area bank laws. We will have a lot of laws which will be implemented in our starter. Law number 1, every time when our server is started up, we need to send a raven to say that the server was started up. Okay. Let's create new project, which will be our starter. Spring initializer. Again, it will be Game of Thrones. It will be Iron Bank Riga starter. Next. Actually, I don't need here anything except from Lombok. Okay, let's create this one. New window. So now I will work with two projects. One is, this is our project, and another one is our starter, which will help to our project to do the common stuff. Where it is? Here it is. Enable after import. The first thing you need to do in your starter, I'll explain in the end of the talk why we need to do that. It's to remove here, if you created the starter as a Spring Boot project, you need to remove this block of the build. In a couple of words, I will explain it later in more details, but in a couple of words, this block is responsible for building fat jar. Okay? In case your Spring Boot application is executable, something executable which can be executed, you need this block because you want to receive an executable jar, which contains all your dependencies inside. But in case we write in the starter is not something which is executable, so we need to build a regular jar. So I don't need this block in my starter. Another thing I will do, I will delete the test directory. It's a starter, I don't need any tests. No, just to save the time. Okay, now, how can we send the Raven when the context is started up? Okay, I need to listen to some event that context was refreshed, event that context was started up, and then we want to send the Raven. So I will create a class. We'll call it Raven Sender Application Listener. So he will hear the event of our application and we'll send the Raven. So I need to implement interface called Application Listener. We had this interface also in the regular Spring. It's not related to also Spring, just Spring Boot. And in we have several events we can catch. If I will do this one, I will receive here the common event, and now I will need to check of this instance of what kind of event is here. So I don't want to do this. I want to do more simple. I want to concentrate on the event I want to catch. So it will be context refreshed event. This one. Okay, now only context refreshed event will invoke this method, and we will just send Raven was sent. That's Raven was sent. This is the first step. So we just need to develop some infrastructure or some classes or some beans, whatever you need in our starter. The next thing, we should prepare the configuration. Theoretically, I can do something like this. I can create the configuration inside my starter. Let's call it starter config. We will mark it with add configuration annotation, configuration, and we can do here component scan, right? In case I'm doing component scan, I can put here the annotation of component or service. Service is component, right? It's the same. To put service or component, just the issue of semantics. but I will not do this. It's not good idea, and it's not. It's kind of the rules how you write in your starter. When you write in your starter, usually you will not have too many beans. Okay, in your starter usually it's 10 beans, 20 beans. Even you saw that we received 400 something beans, but it happened because in the project I tested it, I have something about 20 starters. So in average, each starter give me something about 20 infrastructure beans I can use, like data source and transaction manager. So it will not be too much. If it will not be too much, we prefer to see the declaration of all the beans inside the same class. In order, it will be convenient to open the starter configuration and to see what is this configuration giving to you. This is reason number one. Reason number two, it's not good idea to scan the packages, because in case we develop a starter for our company, for example, we have microservice architecture, and we have a lot of microservices, and we have one or several starters which can help to all the projects. The chance that the group ID, I mean the packages, right? The packages of my starter and the packages of my real project will be the same, at least the prefix is very big. And in case my starter decides to scan all the packages of Game of Thrones, Iron Bank starter or something like this, there is a chance that he will find beans of other starter or the real project. So usually nobody do this. So we will not scan. We prefer to declare the bin. I created its class here. So it will be public Raven application listener, return new application listener. Okay. What now? I finished to write my starter. Okay, it's very simple starter, only one class, only one bin, only one configuration which declares this bin. And now somehow I need that this configuration will be resolved in my project who want to use the starter. So what can we do? Theoretically, we can do something like this. Okay, we can write annotation, enable some starter. You're familiar with such kind of annotations? I can show you, it's very simple to write them. You can do enable Iron Bank starter. I'm sorry, it should be annotation. Interface, retention, runtime. Okay. And what will I do here? I can just make an alias. So the enable something, it's usually the alias to some import of some configuration. And here I can write my, what it was, starter conf.class. Okay, that is all. And then I can maybe install or commit this, and anybody who will depend on my starter, they will see that there is annotation enable my starter, and they will be able to use it. But this is not our way. We want that the people who use our starter will know nothing about our internals. So it means doing this, it's not much better than doing this. Okay? And the thing we want to use, it's the approach of the Spring Factories. To make it real starter, we should manage file called Spring Factories. Let me explain the idea. The idea is that any starter can describe his configurations, and some mechanism, I will show it later, in Spring Boot project, any Spring Boot project automatically will find some configuration file of the starter, and in this configuration file, starter describes himself. Okay, it's kind of a version of control for the starters. What we should do, in our resource directory, we should create a file called Spring Factories, but it should be located under the meta inf directory. So I'll write meta inf / spring.factories. Okay. If you did it correctly, you will see IntelliJ will sign it. And inside this file, we can describe a lot of things, but let's start with the main things the starter want to describe. Starter want to say what configuration it has, in order that its configuration automatically will be loaded by somebody who uses this starter automatically. How will I do it? I need to write here enable after configuration. Enable after configuration. And here I should just write the value of my configuration class, the fully qualified name. So it will be startel configuration, like this. Okay. By the way, you can see that in any project which is Spring Boot project, there is a lot of Spring Factory files. You see how many? Because any starter has his own Spring Factory file which describes his internals. Okay, after we did this, where is my starter? After we did this, we just can go to the Maven, and I need to Maven install in order that the jar of this project will be located in .m2 directory, because I want to share it with my other local projects. Now I can just copy paste the dependencies of my starter, so it will be here. I need to take the block of my group ID, my version, and artifact ID. I will go to the POM. Now we are in the real project, right? So we go to the POM, and exactly like we had a dependency for the Spring Boot starter web, I will add dependency for my own starter, which already exists in .m2 directory. Okay, after I will restart this project, we should see that Raven was sent. Okay, so we'll discuss it in the end also. You see, Raven was sent is here. But the idea, when you build in microservice architecture, usually you have a lot of rules between the microservices, the common things, the common infrastructure. And in order not to copy-paste your code every time, and in order even not to expose it to the developers, maybe developers should not be familiar with any rules. You can just create a starter with a lot of rules and to say to your developers, just depend on it. Or you can, you know, in your parent POM of your company, just include your starter, and automatically everybody will receive your the stuff your starter declares. Okay, it can be controllers inside your starter, it can be some bin post-processor, some infrastructure code, and all these will be described in the configuration of the starter. The configuration will be described in the Spring Factories, and any Spring Boot project will work with it automatically, without doing nothing, you don't need to know nothing about your starter in order that it will work. Okay, let's continue. So we received a version of control. But the question is how it's really implemented in Spring. If it's really received in the version of control, we'll see it a little bit later. So what happens? Yeah, okay. Here it will be an explanation how actually it's working. So let's try to understand where is located this mechanism of Spring Boot, which actually search for these Spring Factories files of all the jars in the class bus and loads all the configurations from there. Let's look at this. Okay, so do you familiar with this annotation, Spring Boot application? Every time when you have Spring Boot project, your main class marked with this annotation, Spring Boot application. But what this annotation means, this annotation, it's kind of a best practice. It's it holds inside several additional annotations. You see, you have here the component scan. Because of this, you don't need to put your own component scan annotation in the main Spring Boot configuration. It's configuration in any case, and it also has the enable after configuration annotation. And all this magic actually are behind this enable after configuration annotation. What it's doing, enable after configuration actually making an import of enable after configuration import selector. Let's talk a little bit about enable after configuration import selector. Do you familiar with at import annotation? You're already familiar with, because I showed you that you can just make an at import and the configuration will be loaded. Several years ago, many years ago, I thought that at import annotation always taking the parameter which is the class of the configuration, and this is the only option. But it's not. It can be three options. At import annotation can take a configuration that should be imported, but it also can take some kind of registrar. Registrar, it's a class which can create the bin definition on the fly. Okay, not too much popular, Spring Boot uses by himself, but people usually don't familiar with that. And the third option, what annotation at import can take, is the import selectors. What is the import selector? It's an interface, and it's a lot of implementation of import selector. Specific, this one, enable after configuration import selector, his duty to scan for all the class paths, to enter inside each jar, and to find the Spring Factories files, to find inside Spring Factory files property called enable after configuration to see what's written behind against it and load all this configuration. Okay, so he will look like this: import selector. So this is exactly what is he doing. He's scanning all these class paths, all our jars. It can be jars which are starters, regular jars, our starters, not our starters. He doesn't care. He scans all of them, find all the starters, all the Spring Factories, and load all the configurations. The mechanism, which was developed, I think, in 2010, many years before that Spring Boot was released in Spring 3.2, called Spring Factories. Spring Factories Loader. The class Spring Factories Loader is just a mechanism which was not in use in Spring till they invented the Spring Boot. But the idea that we will have some class which easily can receive from us what should be found in the Spring Factories and will bring all the values of this property was developed a lot of years ago. Okay, so this is how it looks like. Spring Factories Loader, you can use it by yourself if you want to have some custom properties which will be automatically scanned from your Spring Factories. You can use the same class which is already written. You see, it's very simple. It has several static methods. For example, you have method called load factories or load factory names, and you just should provide the name of the property, which is your class for enable, for example, enable after configuration. And then this method will bring you a list of all properties with this name from all the jars from all the Spring Factories. And the enable after configuration annotation, which brings to us the import selector, exactly doing this, using this mechanism to find all these values. So we received kind of inversion of control of the starters. But it's not totally, not exactly. So it means when I try to understand by myself how people should write starters, I see that any starter have his own Spring Factory files which describes regarding his configuration. And in many cases this is correct, but it's not correct regarding the known, well-known starters of the Spring Boot. If you will open the main Spring Factories file inside Spring Boot after configure, the jar Spring Boot after configure you always have in your class path because any starter depends on it. And you will find out that this something about 100 configuration which is written here in one central jar. More than that, one of these configuration which is mentioned here called cached after configuration makes an import of another import selector, and this import selector doing something like this. You see, it's just a map with much more configuration. Okay, you just hard-coded this. So what do we have in fact? First of all, we have a lot of starters which have their own Spring Factories which describe themselves. In addition, we have the central Spring Factories which describes hundreds of configuration of popular starters. And in addition, we have some hard-coded configuration which always will be loaded. And this is a question. All these configuration will be always loaded. Can you see here the names? Why do I need, for example, Redis cache configuration? Maybe I don't work with Redis. Why do I need this? What about this? Here we have Rabbit after configuration or cache after configuration. Why do I need this configuration? I actually maybe don't need them. So you don't need to worry because Spring Boot will filter them out immediately after they even not be loaded. They will be scanned, but we have the conditional mechanism who can filter out all not needed stuff. And our next topic is to understand how this conditional mechanism is working because it is super important. Okay, so we want to concentrate what conditions and how can we implement the conditional mechanisms. Okay, let's start with the next demo. Now, in order again to have some task which will force us to write some conditional things, I think about this. Raven should be sent only in production. Okay, but how can we know if it's production or not? In Spring Boot, we have a lot of existing annotations like condition on missing class, condition on property, condition on something else. But we don't have annotation in Spring Boot, condition on production. because nobody can know what is production and what is not. So now we want to invent our own mechanism of conditions, which will be called condition on production. And let's see how can we do that. So first of all, I'm going to back to my starter. And I want to add an annotation. And this annotation will mark the bin here. So I want to say that this bin, which sends the Raven, he need to be created only in production. So I will do this. How I said the name will be? Conditional on production. Okay. Conditional on production. Okay. So let's create this annotation. And let's see what should be done. So in case you want to customize some condition logic, you will create your own annotation and you will bind it with conditional annotation to some class. You see, any conditional annotation should be marked with conditional annotation, which is Spring annotation. By the way, this annotation exists from Spring 4. And this conditional annotation taken from us the name of the class, which will hold the logic, which will be, and this logic will be invoked, and this logic will decide condition returns true or false. So let's call, the convention is usually something like this, on prod condition dot class, okay? So this class should be created, and this is not just a class, this class should implement condition interface, okay? Otherwise it will not be compiled. If we'll remove it and just put simple class here, it's not good. Okay, it should be a class which implements condition. This will enforce me to implement method matches, and here I can write my own logic, which will return true or false according to what I want. So let's decide what is the condition of production. I remember several years ago I worked in a Star Home company. It's a very big company which monitors signals from the telephones, and they had some big data stuff. And they wanted to develop some automatic mechanism which will resolve when it's production or not. And do you familiar with the profiles of the Spring profiles? Spring profiles, right? And I suggested you can use just profiles. And they said no, profiles it's not good for us because we need to close the profile by the environment variable. So, but we can add additional machines to our cluster, or we should provide some batch script will be with profiles. It's too complicated for us. We want something automatic. And I say, okay, give me a logic, give me an idea how can my code know if he's running on production machine or not. And then this manager thought and said, you know what? If it's Windows, it's not production. Otherwise it is. And I said to him, but it's not so good idea. Maybe someday the developer will come with his Macintosh, or will, oh, no, we don't have such developers, and we will not. Okay, so, but we will think about something more interesting. I want just to have some pop-up which will ask, because we are in Iron Bank. Every time when we run an Iron Bank application, they want to see a pop-up, and this pop-up will ask, is it production or not? Okay, it's very good idea, I think. So we will do something like return J option pane. Familiar with the swing? J option pane show input dialog, and here will be our question: is it production? Okay, this method will return a string, which will come from the user, and we will make it lowercase, and we'll say something contains yes. Okay, so this is production. If not, this is not production. Okay, now we just need again to go to our Maven to make a build, to make an install. Remember what I have done? We have our configuration. We have the only bin which declared by this configuration, but this bin is condition on production, and condition on production will invoke our logic. Let's see how it will work. Let's restart our Iron Bank application, and let's see. It will be an exception because swing together with Spring Boot, I need to make some trick in order it will work. I need to allow it. I have this one here. Okay. It's just to allow that the pop-ups will be available from web application. You see, now we have a pop-up, is it production? And if I'll say yes, my Raven will be sent, okay? Let's restart it and let's check if it's really working. And if I will say no, my revenue is not sent. Okay? So we developed our own conditional annotation, but I want to, I have some riddle. I think we will go to the break after you will solve this riddle in case you will solve it. In order to make it more interesting, this riddle was not solved by Jürgen Holler. The one, Jürgen Holler, familiar with it? Jürgen Holler is the only founder of Spring which still is working on the Spring, and he perfectly knows his code. And till now, he's writing 80% of the code, but even him didn't solve this puzzle. For example, we have our conditional annotation. We already know how to develop conditional annotations. We have conditional on winter, okay? And I use this annotation in two places. In one place, it's above my class, and in another place, I use it above some bin declaration. Okay, so I use this annotation twice. And do you agree that the logic which is behind this annotation can be very expensive? Time is also expensive. Maybe this logic is going to some database and checking some values, and according to this, it's true or false. Maybe this logic is going to some web service, waiting for a half hour, and then it's true or false. So this can be expensive logic. And it's very interesting how many times this logic will be invoked if my conditional annotation used more than once. Okay, let's see. So this is an answer. For example, per each invocation, we should pay $100. So if it be $100 because Spring is smart and he will cache the answer from my conditional class, maybe Spring is stupid and he will not cache, so it will be 200 because I have this annotation in two places. And the other strange answers. Who think that the $100 is correct answer? You want to go to the break, I see. Who think that 200 is the correct answer? Who think that number 3, 300 or 400 is the most strange answer, right? What does it mean, 3 or 4? Who, and we're talking about scenario that the answer always is yes, because if answer is no, this mechanism will not continue. Okay, what regarding the answer number 4 and answer number 5? Oh, you believe. Okay, so the correct answer is 3. And it's very complicated to understand how it's working and why. I try to translate it to the English, but this is exactly how it's working. But it's less important how it's working. I just will tell you the rules, and I will tell you how can we solve this problem, because it's really a problem. In case your conditional annotation is above the class, like at component, and together with this, it's there, this condition will work 3 times per each bin. Per each bin 3 times. In case this annotation is inside your configuration, together with add bin annotation, it will be 2 times. In case it's in the starter, it will be only time per bin. So let me show you. If I will put the same annotation, right? We can use this annotation because if it depends on the starter and this starter has this annotation, we can use it here also. So I can, for example, mark my controller with the same on prod conditional on production annotation, okay? And now let's restart it and let's see how many times it will ask me if it's production or not. You see, it is the first time I'm saying yes. Second time I'm saying yes. Third time I'm saying yes. And the last time, yes. Because one time, per this one, it was 3 times, and from the start, it only 1 time. It was not done by purpose. If it was done by purpose, Jürgen Holler was not the answer. It happened by mistake because there is a several mechanism of scanning. First of all, the configuration and scanning, then inside the configuration and scanning, then additional configuration of import will be scanning, and several times this mechanism can be invoked, and nothing to do with that except of doing cache of the condition. So let's try to cache, and let's go to the break. How can we cache it? Because these guys say caching is not working. We'll try to check it out. Cache will be very simple, right? We will go back to our starter. We will find the code of this condition. And now I just want to extract it to some variable, the answer, right? I'll control, I'll control C, something like this. Okay, so it will be Boolean. Okay, it should be an object. And I want to say if if it's not yes, why? It's yes, it's answer. Okay, if I said answer, did it change something else? Okay, if answer is null, it means we should read it. Otherwise, we don't need to read it. And if I will build the starter, what? Where? Ah, okay, because of that he asked me. Okay, contains yes, right. And now if I will build it again, let's see, where's my Maven? Where's my Maven? Here it is. Maven install. And we'll try to rerun it again in order to understand we solved the problem or not. And we'll try, what null pointer? Where on the pointer? If answer is now, I'm sorry, no. This is not excuse mistake, yeah. I started to use too many languages the last time. Okay, yes, you see, it didn't solve the problem. And in order really to solve it, what should be done? Static. Because the mechanism of conditions not only just invoke the code of this condition several times, he every time create the object of the condition again and again. And in order we want to cache it, we need to use here the static variable. And what I'm doing, I'm running. Oh, my daughter frightened me. Yes, you are right. I need to make Maven install. Yes, sure. So after it's done, we can rerun it and check that. I hope that build was over. Yes. And see, now it's working correctly. Jorgen Hollner promised me that in some version of Spring, the conditional annotation will have some flag. Cacheable, not cacheable. Because for themselves, they do the caching. But for us, we should do it. Okay, so we will make a break for 10 minutes, 20 minutes. How many? Maybe we can continue without a break? Does anybody manage this room? 15 minutes? Okay. You manage the room. What is your name?